And joining me via Skype from Missouri is in the United States is a rights activist, Habeeb Salawu. Habeeb Salawu, thanks for joining us. Let me start by getting your thoughts on the trial so far and what your takeaway is.
Thank you for having me. I mean, for a lot of people who are having to, watch those videos, relieving those gory sites that led to the death of George Floyd, it's really emotional. But then again, when it comes to justice, you have to, pretty much look at all the angles to a case. So a lot of people would tend to be in support of justice for George Floyd, but I guess the defense will try as much as possible to try to pin his death on something else beyond the excessive force that we saw from Derek Chauvin.
It's interesting that you mentioned the gory videos, because for the first time, it does look like we're seeing the pieces of the puzzles of how he died come together. When you see the never before seen footage presented in court, what do you make of all of these footages that we're now seeing that we never knew existed?
So, based on the little we saw from at the moment when this thing became a global issue, when it went viral, we did not have a full clear picture of the extent of damage that was done. And having to watch those videos really hurts, especially as you go through the process minute by minute, seeing how he was pleading for his life until the moment when he became totally helpless. It begins to get you really agitated, and you start to question humanity. At what point does a police officer go beyond training to be at least human to other people? And then there's also this semblance of cockiness that you can see from the Derek Chauvin, with both hands in his pocket as he snuffs life out of George Floyd. It's a painful thing to watch, to be honest.
Also painful is the emotional testimony from those who are close to him, especially the one from his girlfriend, Courtney Ross, as she talked about their struggle with opioid. What do you think that testimony would do for the prosecution in this case?
I pray that it sways the jury, because you see, there are some trigger words that are being used, and one of such words is addiction. So when people hear addiction, they try to, it's pretty much tied to some sort of crime. People do not understand that somebody going through pain and wants to get relieved could be addicted to painkillers. So I like the fact that his girlfriend came to testify yesterday, because if you had seen the way the defense counsel was going, they were pretty much trying to employ a lot of stereotypes. So you see one of the witnesses that came, they were trying to suggest that he became angry and angrier, which sits perfectly well into the narrative that black people tend to be angry and violent. And then, but his girlfriend coming to testify yesterday showed us the soft side that we all have, irrespective of our battles with whatever addictions we may have. So I believe that would sway the jury, but then there are still many arguments to come. But the most potent yesterday, where when we had the medical officers come in to say, it pretty much appeared that George Floyd was dead before he had no pulse before they arrived at the scene, and that was way past the 8 minutes. So you start to question a lot of things watching those videos. If you're not very careful, you may become really irritated and angry.
Absolutely.
As a black person in this country.
When it does also seem like, when you listen to the defense, it does also seem like George Floyd is the one on trial and not Derek Chauvin. It does seem that way, that his character is being put on trial. Did it feel that way for you?
It's exactly what I was saying about stereotypes. So what he's trying to push forward is that, hey, this guy was a drug addict. He had excess fentanyl and opioid in the system, and as a result, that was the cause of death. And in the opening statement by the prosecution, what they basically said is, everybody has one or two things they're dealing with. If you do not agitate a cause of death, you cannot just say that people who are working on the streets who have opioid addiction will just die. We cannot run away from the fact that this man was held down. He was pleading for life. He was begging to breathe. So it goes beyond addiction at that point. This is somebody who is struggling to leave, and then he was held down. I mean, looking at the other side of the video, because we only saw the side where the other officer was trying to, maintain peace with the crowd. But looking at the other side, look at the number of policemen that held him down, and he was in handcuffs. Yet there was a knee on his neck for over 8 minutes. I think that the verdict on this case will go a long way to highlight some of the civil rights in this country, some of the injustice that a lot of Black African Americans face in this country. A lot of people are looking forward to how this case will end, because it's a true test of judiciary. It's a true test of justice in America, and it touches on everything: race, equality, equity, everything.
I guess there is still so much time to get to the verdict, to get to the end of this case. But right now,
Right.
how is this trial changing the conversation or impacting on the conversation of race in the U.S., especially as we're seeing new clips coming up?
So prior to this, I'm sure you heard about the Asians that were attacked across, first in Atlanta and then in pockets, across the country. So there are concerns about race in America. Um, for African Americans, this is not new. So I believe the Biden administration should come out and be, more the same level of activity that we saw prior to the election, the same level of concern that we saw prior to the election. I expect that to continue. I expect this government to try to look at civil rights and race equality and everything in the country. Based on my perception, I do not think, maybe because the case is still in court, I do not think with the government so far is doing as much as it promised to do before getting into office. But
Absolutely.
this is going to be a game changer.
Just before I let you go in about a minute, you talked about the verdict and talked about what Biden can do or what this administration can do, because the verdict doesn't really change the system. It just highlights, we don't know what the verdict is going to be. Probably this whole situation or the George Floyd trial just highlights what the challenges in the system. But what can be done in terms of concrete actions to change the system?
A lot of reforms, a lot of justice reforms. There are also so many institutional bias that have to be dealt with. How do you treat people with minorities in this country? How does the police respond to calls that have to do with people that have mental health issues? How does the police deal with people that have addiction problems? How do you the application of force? To what level do we do that? How do we apply restraint? Are we supposed to? Does the police have to go through some sort of retraining? There was a misconception with defund police that was being, pushed out by the Black Lives Matter movement, because it seemed like they were basically saying, "Do not fund the police." But what they were trying to say, or basically, let me say what I understood them to say, was that they were asking for a redistribution of the funding that goes to the police. Let's put in more funding into training, getting people better equipped to deal with emergencies. There was no need for George Floyd to have died. We had about 3 to 4 policemen around him. He was in handcuffs. Yes, he may have resisted going into the vehicle, but at some point where he was held down, you could. If you heard Derek's superior say yesterday that at some point when there was no resistance, there was no need applying excessive force leading to his death. So there has to be a lot of retraining. There has to be a lot of, and there also has to be repercussion, because most times when things like this happen, most of the policemen get away with it. So it would involve a lot of reorientation, and the Biden administration has to lead it. It has to come from the top.
The trial is still on. We'll continue to see how things play out in that courtroom. Rights activist Habeeb Salawu, thanks for talking to us.
Thanks for having me.